Welcome to another episode of the Doctors Building Wealth podcast. Today, we'll be talking about the power of patterns in real estate. And this is a subject that we really wanted to bring to you guys because we've seen the power of patterns throughout our whole real estate journey, but even more so, I would say, in the last 5 years, teaching Zero to Freedom and leading semi-retired MD, we've seen our students go and find so many interesting patterns and really unlock that for the whole community. And so we wanted to kind of make you guys aware of why this is such an important subject, what exactly we're talking about when we say the power of patterns, and some really common patterns we've seen in real estate, and some new ones that we more recently discovered in the last few years.
Yeah, and I wanted to emphasize that this is something that I've seen become even more important in this environment where interest rates have gone up and the market really has shifted. And what we've seen is that we've seen our students have to be more creative. And part of creativity is tapping into these patterns. If you can tap into these patterns, then you can actually create really great deals.
So let's start by creating the framework or setting the framework for you guys of what we're talking about when we're talking about patterns. And so patterns are really, there's, I think, three ways to think about them. They're ways of looking at things that are repeated over and over again. And you can look at them in terms of, are you recognizing patterns? Are you utilizing patterns? And are you creating patterns? And so recognizing patterns is about seeing patterns that already exist and being able to recognize them in the first place. Because a lot of times when we're beginning in real estate, for example, we don't even see the patterns until our attention is drawn to them. And then we start seeing them one place and then we'll see them over and over and over again. And so let's give you a simple example of what recognizing a pattern might look like. So when we were first starting out investing in real estate together, Kenji had been investing since 2021, but we decided together to start investing in real estate. We read a book, and one of the things the author talked about was renting out garages and exactly how he did that. And so then we started to look for the pattern of garages that were kind of separated from the building, the main building with the renters, that had alley access so that we could rent it to a third party. We could get more money because they were using it as a workshop or something else. So we had now our eye open. So when we saw properties where there was a main building and there was this detached garage with an alley space, now we could recognize the pattern. That's the first step. The second step is to utilize that pattern. And so then second step we did when we bought our first property, actually, that had that detached garage with that alleyway. And we said, okay, we're going to set it up exactly like the guy told us to in the book, and we're going to rent it to a third party. Now, our property manager at the time said, that's not possible. Nobody does that, right? Because he hasn't seen the pattern and he certainly hasn't seen it utilized. And so he was like, it can't be done. Well, we didn't listen to him, luckily. And we went in and we took off the door, we put a roller door and we blocked out the windows and we ran electricity to it. So we spent all this money to do that. And we did rent it out to a third party. And we made $250 a month just renting out that garage that had previously just been leased to the tenants for no additional money. And so now we had created another source of income in that property, which was really great and actually made a huge difference when we went to sell that property a couple of years later. So now we recognized the pattern and we utilized it.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention that we utilized it again and again, right? So that was the first time, and then so we said, okay, the next property, we want to find a property that is a really good investment, but also has this detached garage, and we're looking for this patterns, and we also shared this pattern with our agent, and our agent was helping us find this pattern, and so that's another level of utilization. It's not just utilizing on that first property, but utilizing it over and over again, and that's how you can like literally print money, right? You can make significant amount of money by utilizing these winning patterns.
Now, the next step, of course, would be to create a new pattern ourselves. So if we had taken a garage and maybe we had turned it into a gathering space and now we had rented it out for events, that might be another way that we would have created a pattern. But you see the steps that happen is first you have to start recognizing it, recognizing things. You need to start then utilizing them. And then the last step is you become more creative. And that's what we've seen more and more in our own real estate portfolio, but also the portfolios of our community is people go and they get creative and they're creating patterns that we've never read about, that we've never done. And it's really remarkable to have a community. And that's one of the values of community is to learn from each other and to be able to see what people do new that are creative and be able to apply it yourself, that pattern on your own portfolio.
Yeah, and that's what we see when we do our free Fast Fire to Freedom Summit every year, where we interview several students and we hear their real estate stories. One of the things that we're doing is we're trying to spot those patterns. We're trying to recognize new patterns, and oftentimes. Our students are actually creating new patterns without even knowing that they've created it. So then, what we're doing is that we're taking that created pattern, and then we're sharing it with others so that they can recognize it in other properties and in their market, and they can utilize those patterns. And again, this is the way we're leveraging our community to come up with even more ideas for everybody to go out and build portfolios and make significant amounts of money beyond the typical duplex or single family home. These are ideas that are next level. These are ideas that will help you cash flow when most people are out there saying it's impossible to cash flow in this market.
Yeah. So, for those of you who've taken zero to freedom, we've always called these patterns recognizing hidden value, recognizing how you can take a property and you can make it make more money or decrease the expenses. And there are literally patterns for hidden value, adding bedrooms, doing things like renting this garage, billing back utilities. There's so many ways to take a property that's poorly performing or performing subparly and turning it into something that really gets that cash and cash return, gets that 10% or maybe even more, but it comes to you as really just a terrible deal, but you turn it into something, and it takes recognizing patterns and then applying them, utilizing them to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that term hidden value still is appropriate, right? Because the opportunities are hidden to the people who are just starting to take our course. It's such a common thing for them to say, I've been looking at Redfin and Zillow and I don't see anything that cash flows, right? And the issue is that the opportunities, the patterns are hidden to them, right? The patterns of opportunity they just can't see yet. And again, part of what we do in Zero to Freedom is share some of these common patterns, and then some even more advanced ones as well, that they can then go out and ideally utilize them in their own market.
Yeah, so let's talk about some patterns in action in real estate specifically, just so you guys start to see what we're talking about a little bit more. And then if you own your own real estate portfolio, you can maybe start applying some of these if you haven't already.
Yeah, so we talked about the pattern of using garages. I wanted to talk a little bit more about taking advantage of typically unused spaces like attics and basements. These are places where you can typically add square footage, especially if they're unfinished. Just by finishing them and creating a living space, you can add significant square footage to a home, and then also with that space, you can oftentimes find space for a bathroom that would also add significant value. And again, these are very, very simple patterns, but I wanted to start out with some of the more simple ones because, again, just wanted to kind of get you into the thought process of like looking for patterns and finding patterns, so you can understand how these patterns result in you being able to kind of generate more cash flow and force appreciation in these properties.
One of the most simple basic patterns is recognizing under market rents. So if you're looking at properties in a specific area, you start to get a sense of what a property should rent for, what a unit should rent for based on its square footage and its bedrooms and bathrooms and its finishes. Just by looking at lots and lots of different properties that are available for rent, and also looking for properties that are available for sale and seeing what they had been renting for. And so you start to get an idea in your brain of what's possible in that market, in those maybe even down to the neighborhood with rents. And then you'll see a property pop up for sale. You'll look at it and it'll say, renting at 600 a month. And you know that you've seen many properties with finishes that you would make to this property that rent for 1,000 a month. And then all of a sudden you recognize there's a major under market rent. Not only is this person probably renting at 600 a month, and currently it could be renting at 700 or 800. If you improve it, you're going to be able to rent it at 1,000. So you're taking patterns that you're recognizing, and now you're starting to utilize them by knowing what's possible with that property right as it is, but also what you're going to be able to turn it into in the future.
Yeah, now I wanted to kind of share some more advanced ones where the opportunities really are hidden, and these are examples drawn from our Fast Fire to Freedom Summit. The first one is looking for properties that are on septic and rated for fewer bedrooms than the property actually has. And so let me kind of explain that in a little bit more detail. So if you know anything about septic, when you go to sell a house, you can only sell the house for the number of bedrooms that that septic is rated for. So if a home, let's say, has 6 bedrooms, and this is a real example, if a home has 6 bedrooms, but it only has a 3 bedroom septic, it's only rated for 3 bedrooms, then when you go to sell that property, you can only sell it as a 3 bedroom. And so what this couple found was they found this property that was under record. Nobody saw this property because it was listed as a 3 bedroom. Everybody in this market was looking for 5 bedrooms or more. This home actually had 6 bedrooms, but again, the problem was the owner couldn't list it as a 6 bedroom. They had to list it as a 3 bedroom. So when they came across this property, they realized, wow, this is a huge house. And what they were able to do after they bought the property is they could either increase the septic or they could connect to the city sewer. This home was actually very close to city sewer. Once they did that, then they could actually list the property as a 6 bedroom. And so they were able to buy it for closer to the 3 bedroom price. And then just by connecting it to city sewer, they're going to be able to actually sell it for the 6 bedroom price. So this is a significant amount of value that they're getting. And what's the pattern here? Well, the pattern is looking for homes that have more bedrooms than they're actually rated for septic. And so you want to find an area that has a lot of septic homes on septic, and then look to see if you can find this pattern. One thing I might do is look at the square footage and say, okay, I want to find a home with a lot of square footage, but only listed as with few bedrooms, right? And that would be a mismatch there that you can potentially spot these properties. It goes, you'd have to investigate further, but that is an example that I think, that's a pattern that I think is a really winning pattern that anybody could utilize.
And I have to say, I've been using that pattern of looking for high square footage houses that only have a few bedrooms for single family homes for since the very beginning of when we started investing in real estate. Because a lot of times, well, a couple of things. Number one is a lot of times if it's an unfinished basement, they won't include it in the square footage. And so there'll be an entire unfinished basement that you will see an unfinished square footage, and that will allow you to add more bedrooms and bathrooms. But also, if you can find a house that has a lot of square footage, but only 3 or 4 bedrooms, and you can add a fifth or sixth bedroom, especially if you're going to do Section 8 where they rent by the bedroom, you can really increase the cash and cash return of those properties. And so I think looking at property square footage in any listing, not just, vacation rentals and on septic, is actually a really important search you should be doing on, your Redfin, your Trulias, to be able to find that hidden value in even just basic single family homes.
Now, I wanted to share another advanced pattern, and this comes from a student who went around and he wasn't necessarily intentionally looking for this, but he was looking at these listings where these properties would be sitting there for a really long time. And the issue with these properties, it turned out, was that they were a little bit kind of on the he called it unicorn side. They were unusual properties. They were different. They weren't your standard duplexes. They weren't your standard fourplexes. And what he was finding was that these properties were the potential buyers were having trouble getting loans on them because they were a little bit unusual. And again, he called them, because they were unicorns, that they couldn't get loans on them. And so that made it very difficult for people to buy them. And what he was able to do was he was able to, first of all, easily spot these properties, because these are the properties that be sitting on market for a while. And not every property that sits on the market for a while fits this pattern. It has to be a property that is more unique. Sometimes properties sit on the pattern because they're overpriced, for example, or they have some major issue. What he was finding was he was just finding unusual properties. Like, so one property was a triplex, but it had this almost like a concert hall attached to it. So it had this commercial space attached to it. So that's the reason why you couldn't just go get residential financing for it. You had to go out and get a commercial lender to understand this project, to understand this property enough to feel comfortable to lend on it. So what he did was, his focus was, let me go out and find a lender who who I can sit down and talk to and describe these properties and build the business case, right? And that was his pattern, was, let me go out and find properties that have been sitting on market that are a little bit unusual, and then I can take care of the financing. I got that figured out because I have a good relationship with a lender. And that's another great example of an advanced pattern. I think what most people do when they see a property that's been sitting on market, they just kind of pass it by because they're like, okay, this property clearly is overpriced, or there's some problem with it. That's why it's sitting on market. But actually, these properties were actually home runs. They were actually true unicorns in the sense that they were great deals is if you can get funding for them, right? And so that was the issue. And so that's another pattern that I think is really a winning pattern that anybody in any market can look for these properties. And so again, wanted to share this with you guys. Now, if you want more of these advanced patterns, again, the Fast Fire to Freedom Summit literally is like a pattern vault. We get so many different ideas, and you can also get ideas. It's a completely free summit. You can attend, and we've also have past summits as well that you can buy. But just wanted to kind of put out there that this is a pattern vault, and it is a gold mine of opportunity.
Yeah, I also want to mention that you can see patterns in large multifamily, 100 unit plus. You can see patterns in short term rentals. You can find patterns in hidden value in small multifamily. So a lot of times people will come to us and say, hey, can we find hidden value in short term rentals? Absolutely. Like one of the most common ones that we see people do is build a pool, build a hot tub. And that pattern then allows them to bring in a lot more in a nightly rate with their short term rental because they did that. I think about a pattern that we've used on multiple large multifamily properties with really oversized laundry rooms, group public laundry rooms, as we cut the laundry room in half. We still have enough space for washer and dryer for all the units. And now we have the ability to build another unit or build storage or be able to build something in that space that generates additional income. And so there are so many patterns. We can't possibly cover them all in this episode, but these patterns are there. If you've gone through Zero to Freedom and you're in Empire Builders, make sure you check out the content that we have on advanced hidden value and the patterns in there. If you're just going to go through Zero to Freedom next time, make sure you're paying attention to this stuff because we have a lot of those patterns in there because you need to start learning them so you can increase the value of your property. You can increase the cash flow of the property. That's what these patterns allow you to do. And again, as Kenji said, if you're just interested in real estate and you want to get even more ideas, join us at the Fast Fire to Freedom Summit. We do it once a year, but there are available other Fast Fire to Freedom Summit recordings as well. And so we'll put links below for all of these resources if you need them. And so kind of closing reflections, just to kind of summarize, you have to learn to recognize patterns. You then want to start applying them, right? Because if you just recognize them, you don't take action, they're not going to make you any more money. And the goal here as a real estate investor is to have cash flow and to be able to get to financial freedom by creating another source of income through real estate. And then you want to create your own patterns. Once you start to put in the basics in place, you're going to start to be creative. You're going to start to see ways that you can increase the cash flow of your property and increase the value of your property. And then make sure you're part of a community so you can share with others because these patterns are so useful. When you see somebody do it, now it becomes possible for you. And so sharing it is really, you contribute to the growth of everybody around you. And you never know when you're going to find a new pattern. We've seen so many really creative things come out of our community. Okay, if you enjoyed this episode and you're into real estate, make sure to subscribe to this podcast and then also we'll see you next time.